The pandemic has really accelerated our conversation about addressing the digital divide.
For a very long time, Marin County has had the largest opportunity gap for our students, particularly our low-income students and our students of color, of any county in the state of California.
The reason the Marin County Office of Education is so connected to this important issue is we're about education, and we cannot provide the opportunities that our students and our families and our teachers need without ensuring that they have access to robust internet that's available not some of the time, not part of the time, but all of the time.
The biggest takeaway that the Digital Marin project has uncovered that came out of the pandemic is that we certainly have a digital divide in 5 areas around Marin County, but we also have what I call shades of gray. We have old infrastructure, and we also have places in the county where it's served, but not everyone is served, where the internet access stopped at the end of a street because the next block over might not have the financial wherewithal to pay for the services.
We're talking about equity in Marin County. We need to make sure that people have access to the latest tools and technologies so that we can secure economic mobility for our residents. And bridging the digital divide is a critical first step to doing that.
That means that before the pandemic and long after the pandemic, these homes will continue to face unnecessary challenges in childhood education, access to employment opportunities, and a wealth of other information resources that others of us take for granted.
To successfully recover from the pandemic, we must ensure that all individuals and businesses have reliable and affordable internet access. Local and national government action and partnership with the private sector is essential to ensure that no one is left behind, especially households that cannot afford it.
Good morning, and welcome to Bridging the Digital Divide in a Post-Pandemic Marin. My name is Stephanie McNally, and I am the Director of Advocacy and Policy at Canal Alliance. Thank you for joining us today to explore the opportunity before us for collective action toward a more just digital future. We will begin with opening comments from Omar Carrera, the CEO of Canal Alliance, followed by a group of distinguished panelists moderated by the Electronic Frontier Foundation's Associate Director of Policy and Activism, Catherine Trendacosta, and we will close with comments from Mike Blakely, the CEO of the Marin Economic Forum. For the next hour, we are live streaming via YouTube in English and Spanish. During the event, please post your questions or comments in the chat. We may not get to all questions today. There will be follow-up communications from this event with more information and resources to take action on bridging the digital divide in Marin County. For our panelists and speakers, a reminder that this event is being translated. So please keep your speaking pace in mind. Let's begin our program with Omar Carrera.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Omar Carrera. I'm the CEO of Canal Alliance. Thank you for joining this important conversation. I want to give a special appreciation to the organizations that make this event possible. Our partners, Digital Marin, Marin Promise Partnership, the Marin County Office of Education, the City of San Rafael, the County of Marin, Marin Economic Forum, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, Desire to Inspire, and Canal Alliance. And of course, our sponsor, Kaiser Permanente of Northern California. The pandemic has dramatically impacted every aspect of our lives, including our relationships, our work, and our economy. Many of us lost friends and family to the virus. People were out of work, and businesses and schools have been closed or paralyzed by a constantly changing environment. Despite all of this, the world continued to move forward, and we had to adapt quickly. Virtually overnight, businesses, government, and nonprofits had to embrace new service delivery models and turn in-person jobs into remote jobs. The schools had to adopt distant learning models, and people had to create new forms of socialization. What was the one thing that was required to make these transitions possible? A good internet connection. Unfortunately, like many other inequities that surfaced during the pandemic, historical inequities related to internet access and costs, digital literacy, and technology ownership created new barriers and challenges that impacted all of us. It goes without saying that the pandemic caused the world to become much more digitized than it was already was. As we move from crisis to recovery, we must continue to work collectively to resolve the digital divide that persists even in wealthy communities like Marin, in order to build a resilient, caring, and equitable economy. Let's leverage this unique opportunity to respond to emerging challenges, not just by rebuilding what existed before, but by actually addressing inequities to ensure that everyone has access to reliable and affordable internet at work and at home. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I am Catherine Trendacosta. I am the Associate Director for Policy and Activism at the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and I am pleased to be your moderator today. I'm going to introduce our distinguished panelists. Each one will have a few minutes after I introduce them to give a brief overview of their organization and the work they do related to the digital divide. So first up, we have Liza Massey. In 2018, Ms. Massey became the Chief Information Officer for Marin County. Prior to joining Marin County, she served as a technology executive in several state and local government agencies, including San Francisco and the City of LA. During her career, Ms. Massey was also president and CEO of a nonprofit technology organization, as well as the founder and CEO of a successful public sector consulting firm. She served as a senior fellow with the Center for Digital Government and Education, an award-winning columnist for Public CIO magazine, assistant professor for the University of Maryland, and an adjunct professor in the Executive MBA program at University of Nevada, Las Vegas. Ms. Massey has been a member of numerous boards of directors and government task forces and is a frequent speaker at conferences and contributed to numerous publications. She has received several awards throughout her career, including being recognized as a Government Technology Top 25 Doer, Dreamer, and Driver of Public Sector Innovation, and as one of Nashville's top business and civic leaders. She even had the opportunity to accept 2 Daytime Emmy Awards on behalf of the government television channel she managed in Los Angeles. Welcome, Liza.
Thank you. So, Catherine, would you like me to get started?
Yes. So as I said, after the introductions, you'll have a couple of minutes to sort of do a broad overview of the work you're doing in the digital divide and why you think this is such an important issue.
Okay, thanks then. I appreciate that introduction, a little long. In terms of the digital divide here in Marin, I define it as being the inability for access to all opportunities due to a lack of affordable, reliable internet, the devices needed to connect to the internet, and digital literacy, which is the knowledge to be able to use it. Plus, we're seeing other barriers such as language and disabilities. So I am both with the Marin County IST Department, Information Services and Technology, but also the lead for Digital Marin. And Digital Marin is a project that came together to create a roadmap for all of Marin, not just the county. So despite our relative wealth and our location near a major telecommunications hub, San Francisco, we have those 5 areas I mentioned in the video that are unserved or underserved. And those are Marin City, the Canal District, West Marin, and 2 areas in Novato. Another unserved area or group that we found is our older adults. And they're the fastest growing demographic in Marin. we found that they're certainly left on the wrong side of the digital divide, even more so than we first imagined. So the Digital Marin Project is funded by the Board of Supervisors, but it's very collaborative with representatives from all sectors in Marin County. And our goal is to really bridge that digital divide in all of its facets. And if you want to know more about the Digital Marin project and sign up to stay updated, you can go to godigitalmarin.org. You know, we look at the digital divide and we don't think necessarily that Marin is impacted by it, but I think you've heard from all the speakers' videos that we really are. And in terms of that and what the pandemic did to shine the light on it, we now have to make that a priority. The world is increasingly online. It's not going to go back to the way things were before the pandemic, and everyone deserves that opportunity to take full advantage of our digital resources. And we need to understand that broadband is a necessity for everyone, not just a luxury. And in Marin, I'll just wrap this up. In Marin, we, as we're going through the Digital Marin project, we have found that there are many issues that have led to this and underserved areas. But in Marin, we've left build out of broadband to our private industry companies, and it just hasn't happened. The return on investment just isn't there in some of the neighborhoods or areas. There's also issues of our geography and our landscape. So it's really time to have our government, our businesses, education, healthcare, nonprofits, and other sectors come together to work on this issue, even partner with those providers to fix the issues and address the economically challenged areas and ensure that they have access to broadband and all the tools they need to use it effectively.
Thank you. Next on our panel is my colleague Ernesto Falcone. Ernesto is Senior Legislative Counsel at the Electronic Frontier Foundation with a primary focus on intellectual property, open internet issues, broadband access, and competition policy. He represents EFF's advocacy on behalf of its members and all consumers for a free and open internet before state legislatures and Congress. Ernesto's work includes pushing the state of California to pass the strongest net neutrality law in the country in response to federal repeal efforts, as well as leading EFF's research and advocacy to promote universally available, affordable, and competitive fiber broadband networks. Welcome, Ernesto. You have your time to speak on whatever you like.
Hey, thanks, Catherine, and thank you everyone for inviting me here. Yeah, I think the goals of EFF and our work here, particularly in the state of California, has really been focused on kind of two things. One, how do we deliver 21st century ready access to all people? Two, how do we avoid the mistakes of the past that give us what we have today? So the so it really boils down to like what's the infrastructure in the ground and what is it capable of delivering. And we often articulate the digital divide not along the lines of a speed metric or some sort of artificial constraint. It really just boils down to, is there high capacity fiber infrastructure invested into the community that you reside in, and how close is it to your household, and ideally at the end point, but it's connected to every household and business throughout the state. It is useful to think about it that way because I think particularly for the cities in California and the counties that aren't you don't readily identify as rural. There's been a lot of what's called redlining, essentially connectivity that's been upgraded in kind of the high income side or business sector, and the connectivity that was built to essentially slowly reach obsolescence. with no real pathway for those communities to get something better. So a lot of activity in the state of California, I think, to resolve this. Governor Newsom introduced a proposal, I think, that would really revolutionize access by really leaning heavily on the public sector to resolve these issues. And a lot of activity federally that I'm looking forward to discussing with the community here. But I think the pandemic has shifted the debate in a positive way, in the sense of we don't have to suffer this unnecessarily. We can solve these problems ourselves. Lots of other countries are already solving it themselves, have been doing it for long before we have finally kind of caught on. And my hope is this is the year where we begin charting course where the digital divide is a historical footnote rather than a problem.
All right. Thanks, Ernesto. Next on our panel is Christopher Mitchell. Christopher Mitchell is the director of the Community Broadband Networks Initiative with the Institute for Local Self-Reliance in Minneapolis. Mitchell is a leading national expert on community networks and internet access. On a day-to-day basis, Mr. Mitchell runs muninetworks.org, the comprehensive online clearinghouse of information about local government policies to improve internet access. Their interactive community broadband network map tracks more than 600 such networks. He also hosts audio and visual shows, including Community Broadband Bits, Connect This, and Building Local Power. Welcome, Christopher.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Been excited about what the Canal Alliance has done and the larger vision moving forward in the entire region. We pay a lot of attention to what local governments are doing, and I think the best way to get this started is trying to remember to speak slowly, also to look at what communities have done around the nation. We've seen local governments working with local grassroots groups to create emergency wireless networks. And that's one end of the continuum, all the way to the other end, where we've seen some local governments build a fiber optic network that connects to every home in the community and offers service. In the case of Chattanooga, they found a way to offer 17,000 families who were in the free and reduced lunch school program free service for 10 years because they had built this asset already. We've seen cities that offer their own service where they go into competition with existing companies. We've seen cities that work with others. I'll talk about that in a second because it's hard to figure out how to divide these. But one thing we've also seen is cities that start incrementally, or counties or other jurisdictions, because they may not be able to connect everyone right away. So they may start with a plan to have a pilot project and then expand it. We've seen cities that build infrastructure and lease it to other providers, often more nimble local companies that are willing to do that, to then go into competition with the big companies. We've seen cities like in Utah, where a bunch of cities built a network and multiple companies compete on that fiber optic network. We've also seen that in Washington State pretty commonly. The West Coast is kind of where it's at for that, as well as Utah. I think the important thing, though, is that the planning is key, making sure that everyone's at the table when a community is developing its digital equity plan, which will involve everything from infrastructure and prices to digital training. And I want to say that for people who are listening, this space is intimidating to get into, but nearly all of us are self-taught. And this is something that if you dig into it, you can start making a difference pretty quickly, because we need people who are dedicated, who want to dig in and learn it. And it is not as hard as you might think once you start down the path. So looking forward to the Q&A, the discussion with the panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris. Last on our panel is Tracy Rosenberg. Tracy Rosenberg has worked as Media Alliance's executive director since 2007. She has organized and advocated for a free, accountable, and accessible media system, focusing on the protection and sustainability of alternative media outlets, monitored the mainstream media for accuracy and fair representation, and facilitated the training of numerous nonprofit organizations and citizens groups in effective communications. Tracy currently sits on the board of the Alliance for Community Media Western Region. serves on the Anchor Committee of the Media Justice Coalition and coordinates Oakland Privacy, the Bay Area Surveillance Coalition that works regionally to defend the right to privacy and enhance public transparency and oversight regarding the use of surveillance techniques and equipment. Welcome, Tracy.
Thank you, and it's great to be here. So my name is Tracy Rosenberg, and I'm coordinating the Internet Choice Coalition, which is a public-private partnership of internet freedom nonprofits like Color of Change, Churn, the Green Lining Institute, Media Alliance, and EFF, and alternative ISPs like Sonic, Monkey Brain, Paxio, and People's Open Net. Our goal is to take a law that was passed in San Francisco in 2016, the Internet Choice Act, and bring it to all of California. So far, we've been meeting with some success, as Oakland will be introducing the Oakland Internet Choice Act next month, and Berkeley will be introducing a Berkeley Internet Choice Act in the months to come. The first Internet Choice legislation premiered in San Francisco in 2016. Basically, this takes aim at two sort of basic problems in the Internet marketplace: lack of competition or consumer choice, and anti-competitive incentives by the big incumbents, both of which have really some of their most destructive impacts on tenants and on the housing insecure. So Internet Choice legislation says that any tenant who rents a place to live in a multi-unit building should have the ability to use any bona fide internet provider, including something like a mesh network that can physically provide service to them, and should be able to choose whoever can give them the most reliable and affordable service, and whose policies regarding things like privacy, net neutrality, as has come up recently, or anything else most appeals to them. So the legislation provides a process for a tenant to ask for service, regulates what's an appropriate landlord response, and provides for legal remedies if reasonable requests are turned down. It also prevents retaliation against tenants and reimburses landlords for actual costs, but not for made-up costs. This is important for a number of reasons. One of them is the large ISP practice of exclusive agreements, or to say it more candidly, payola. The large incumbents often strike deals with big apartment companies to service all of their units in exchange for various kinds of incentives, which leaves tenants stuck with the service basically that offered the best bribe to their landlord or property. And we know that some of the largest apartment building owners in San Francisco had such agreements in place. So when smaller ISPs get access to multi-unit buildings, then barriers to entry become lower in the broadband marketplace, and we create competition. And competition, by definition, incentivizes internet providers to compete for business by providing better quality or better price. So consumers hopefully don't just get more choices, they get better choices. And smaller ISPs can get a toehold in the marketplace and expand rather than sort of being outstanding. Another aspect of this legislation is letting consumers vote with their pocketbook for internet providers who don't do all kinds of crappy things like sell browser data, agree not to abide by net neutrality principles, at least until we get our California law in place, or don't make campaign contributions, for example, to January 6th insurrection. So this is a way to restore buying power to ordinary people which you often really can't use in a duopoly or controlled marketplace. So Oakland and Berkeley are happening, and it's definitely helpful for people in other areas to support these efforts and say that we want this too. You can find more out at oaklandinternetchoice.com, and we encourage people to reach out to us for legislative language or lobbying assistance if they are interested in having internet choice legislation come together.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. So we're gonna, move to some questions now, both ones that I've prepared and whatever questions we get from the audience. This one is for the entire panel. How do you define the problem of the digital divide, and why is it a priority for you? Let's start with Liza.
Thanks. As I mentioned, we define the digital divide holistically. It's not just about getting affordable, reliable internet, broadband to everyone. That's only part of it. You need the internet services that are, again, affordable. You need the devices. People need to have equipment that works well in that environment. They need the knowledge or the digital literacy that several people have mentioned. And that's usually the description you hear, but we also need to make sure that the services and the information are easy to access, and especially not put barriers up for language barriers or barriers for people with disabilities. The reason it's a priority, I think I mentioned that too. I mean, the world is increasingly online. The pandemic showed that we're going to be there if we want to react to these times when we can't get together. But we're finding and hearing that more businesses, schools, government don't believe they're going to go back to having everyone on site all the time. And so if we don't bridge the digital divide, and very quickly, we're going to leave so many segments behind, not just in these day-to-day things, but in all ways, banking, entertainment. We found that among our older adults, especially, once they were shelter in place or confined to their homes, they really were suffering from social isolation. And these are things that they want to use the internet for. And so we need to enable that. And it really is that broadband is a necessity. It should be treated as infrastructure. It should be funded that way, not considered as a luxury. And I'll close this with, we've been doing focus groups and surveys as part of the outreach for the Digital Marin Project. And we were at a residence home provided by Marin Housing, so it's subsidized housing. And one older gentleman said, at first I thought I was telling you what I need. He said, but this is what we deserve. This is a right that we have that, for broadband and all the things that are needed to make us successful.
Okay, Ernesto?
Yeah, I would, I think when I think about digital divide, one thing that is really important to understand is we, and people familiar with this, we always need more data the next year than we needed the year prior, because something new comes out and something makes more use of the technology and the infrastructure. And we're used to thinking about dial-up and slow internet as effectively things that don't really give you full access to the internet anymore. We're running into this dynamic where if we don't get the infrastructure policy right, we will have a growing digital divide, not a shrinking digital divide, because basic access is not enough. You actually have to have robust access that not only is good enough today, but good enough for decades on out into the future. So that's how I kind of think of the digital divide. And I would say the biggest barrier to it has been, from a policymaking standpoint, the over-reliance on the big national players to deliver broadband to everyone. There's no amount of, we're in 2021. I think it was fashionable to say in 2006, give us the support and the money, and we'll build out the future to people. That was like the advent of a lot of the 21st century infrastructure that started on the commercial side. 2010, 2015, starting to get to the point where you're now at 2021 after a national or global pandemic. They haven't delivered the access today. They're never doing it. And if you don't acknowledge that and realize you have to start looking locally at your own options to solve the problems, then you will always be faced with this problem. So I think that's the biggest barrier right now is it's time to think of what our alternatives are. What are our local public and local private options? How do we pull through those? And how do we take matters in our own hands to solve these problems? And when we realize that other people have already done it with great success, when we realize that lots of Americans, lots of Californians are paying 200 to 300% above what they should be paying for broadband today, then I think we start realizing the time is to kind of conquer this problem on our own, for our own will and work.
All right, thanks. Chris, you're up next.
I don't want to repeat the good points of the two panelists in front of me, so I'll freelance just a little bit to say that I think sometimes people think of the digital divide as being almost related to charity, like we should be good people and extend internet access to everyone. And I don't think we have to think of it that way. We extended electricity to everyone, and we all benefited. People who never set foot outside a city in their entire lives, they benefited because everyone had high quality electricity. Farms got more productive. We had all kinds of children were better able to learn and develop all kinds of innovations. We all benefit when we use these platform technologies to make sure that we all do well. I think it's really important to think about it. One of the major ways that we will benefit is by improving the healthcare system. In making sure that everyone has high quality internet access, the cost of providing much better healthcare than we get today will go down. And that will, again, benefit all of us. And so I don't think we should think of this like charity. This is something we should do as an investment in the future for all of us, even those of us that already have good connectivity today.
Thanks, Chris. I want to remind everyone watching that you can ask our panelists questions by posing them in the comments, and I will ask them the questions that you're asking. Okay, Tracy, you're next.
Yeah, people have covered, lots of stuff. I think I would just add that, the digital divide is not an isolated phenomena. What it basically is the way in which all of these socioeconomic and race-based divides in our society play out in the digital realm. The term just basically means that the digital realm is not exempt from all of the other factors that impact our society. And I think you see that in some really tangible ways in terms of how poor people and other demographic sort of categories, often people of color, are sort of, pushed onto sort of an inferior service model. I've heard a lot of ISPs tell me, for example, that rural communities or young people or whatever demographic target they are selecting will be fine with wireless. They don't need wireline connections, or they can make do with a smartphone. It's basically sort of making a hierarchy of service and condemning large swaths of the country to what are basically functionally second-class levels of service. And that's really the divide that we are looking at. And I think it takes proactive public policy at any point when you are trying to overcome what are longstanding socioeconomic and race-based factors. That's all.
Tracy, you beautifully segued into what my next question was, which is how did we get here? How did the digital divide get so bad? Why are we in this position where we have to work so hard to bridge it? And to save Liza from having to go first every time, I'm going to go backwards this time and start with you, Tracy, even though you kind of answered it in your last question.
Yeah, well, I think that Ernesto could write a book on this, but what it comes to is we've made public policy choices now for decades that have basically, number one, sent lots of money to incumbent providers, big ones who are not incentivized to provide first-class service. With lack of competition, there's not much incentive to do anything that they're not forced to do. And secondly, we've embraced sort of short-term solutions that largely don't change the existing kind of model. And I spoke a bit about basically deciding that wireless only is an adequate solution for some communities when it's not. That's one example. And there are plenty of others. And we see a lot of that now with the subsidies that are flowing from the federal, from the feds. On one level, it's great, but it's temporary. When the money runs out, then nothing changes. And it's putting a lot of money in the hands of big incumbent providers who largely have not been providing the services that we actually need to close a digital divide. So the public policy on the large level, it has to change. And that's what everyone here is, I think, trying to do.
Chris?
I agree. And I think the way to think about public policy changing would be instructed by how we dealt with children that went to school hungry. McDonald's moves food around this country better than most companies. McDonald's has tremendous logistics. We didn't say to McDonald's, you need to figure out how to feed the children. I'm glad we didn't do that. Instead, we had the schools do it because the kids are going to school hungry. So we had food ready for them there. The way to solve the problem of connecting the people who have not yet been connected is to focus on organizations and local governments that have incentives to connect them, rather than saying, hey, Comcast, hey, AT&T, you know how to deal with wires. Why don't you solve this problem of poverty? That is an effort that is foolish. And it's one that our policymakers have embraced, in part because they do not understand how networks work, how broadband works, how the internet works more generally. And we need to pick the entities that actually have incentives to solve this problem and focus there, rather than assuming some massive company can do it because they know what a byte is.
Ernesto?
I love that McDonald's analogy. I think it's absolutely right, and I think it's, and I think it's just indicative of many of the failures that we've had. I mean, I think when we started treating what are and this has been going for a long time. When we started treating an essential service that's as critical as water or electricity as allowed to be treated as a private luxury, it's kind of the beginning of when this all went wrong. When we used to regulate the communications infrastructure in an open, non-discriminatory infrastructure that everyone was entitled to get access to, right up until the 90s. We certainly didn't have a problem of divide of the infrastructure. So, I think that is starting to change, and we really do face some critical questions about how to change it. And I think, to Chris's point, one thing my research has found pretty conclusively is the reason why the big national players will never be your solution is simply because they have to deal with dividends and Wall Street and investor expectations. And so if we are trying to turn around at them, and this is like the debate of right now about what's the 21st century access infrastructure and how do we get to everyone, that's a 30 to 40 year investment project that the country would have to tackle with enormous amount of focus and persistence. And if you go to companies that are being told, how do you make money quickly in a 3-year time frame, you can see how these will never meet up. And so we do have to embrace the public model, the nonprofit model, and other alternatives that can tackle essentially what it will be a 30 to 40 year community investment challenge. Bring us again, and that is probably why I think the source of the mistakes so far has been just a lack of willingness to understand that is how we will get to a 100% connectivity. There is no other way other than that.
Liz, do you have anything to add?
I have a couple of things, and I agree with all the other speakers. one of the things that I'll just point out, that Digital Marin is a project that was started by government. So it is addressing the public policy pieces, but we've reached out to other sectors. And so Mike, who you're going to hear from later, is on our executive steering committee. Omar is on one of our work groups, and I could go on. We've had about 2,500 people already involved. We started the project earlier this year in providing input to our needs assessment. So these are surveys, interviews, participating on work groups. We have an active weekly subscription you can do through the website. And the reason I bring that up, because I do think that's a piece that's missing. It'd be easy for Marin County, the largest local government organization, to say, here's what we're going to do. But we really need involvement by all the governments, but then the other sectors, business, education, healthcare. And we're getting that now. We're building that network of people to come together and help define what Marin's priorities are, what our strategies are, where we need things done the most, and then adopting this roadmap to get us where we need to be. I will say that Marin in particular has relied upon the internet service providers to do the build out, and already talked about some reasons, and everybody else has that they haven't, but we can't totally cut them out of the process. I think there was examples given where government and these partnerships with business and residents, et cetera, have municipally owned infrastructure, but they are letting it be leased to internet service providers, et cetera. So I think we can all get together to build it, but I think we shouldn't run it. As a CIO of Marin County, I don't necessarily want to run as an ISP for everyone, but I do think we've got to take the lead in building it for others. So I think we can't leave them out, but we want to partner with them. And then this project, we are doing that. But I also think that we can't just focus on, okay, we're going to build this municipal network and then everybody's, on it. We've all talked about how this is a bigger problem than just the wires and the Wi-Fi. And so how do we come together as a community to find what resources we have for providing devices or literacy training, map those out and see where we're duplicating efforts or where we've got holes in our patchwork so that we can fill those too. And that is a community local government driven effort.
We have a question from the audience, and I am going to direct this one, I think, to Chris, which is, you have related what some think of as backward politically, Utah, Tennessee, and Alabama that have fiber wired cities and free service to everyone that wants it. Not so in California. Why?
I would like to note that those areas generally have paid services. In Chattanooga, they have offered 17,000 families free service that is supported by the 120,000 families that have signed up to pay for service. So I think California is missed some of this in part for the same reasons that it does not have very many electric co-ops. It was an attractive place for cable companies to invest. And we see electric co-ops in the rural areas in places that the electric companies did not want to invest. And so in California, you have a good enough problem in many areas, which is that if you have Comcast, you probably have good enough. I would not say the same thing about Charter Spectrum. They have significant problems on Zoom calls for people on gigabit connections. So I think ultimately that's the answer, though, is that it's good enough for many areas that localities have focused on other problems until the pandemic made it clear that it was not good enough anymore.
Thanks. Thanks, Chris. Also from the chat, someone has said, we have struggled for a year with big telecom and got nowhere and finally had to purchase in bulk at retail to distribute service. Why are we still kissing the telecom ring and there's no public option? I think Ernesto might be the best person to answer this.
Yeah, we're awfully close to figuring out the public option in California. So Governor Newsom, not that long ago, produced a proposal to invest $7 billion as a combination of the state surplus and the federal rescue dollars that came from the pandemic recovery package in March with the intent of the state of California itself building out an open access middle mile fiber network to bring capacity to all parts of California and to enable local governments, cooperatives, nonprofits with financial support to create a long-term financing for them to build up their own solution. So, in effect, if we, and this is a real fight, so I really want everyone who's paying attention to this, you got to call your legislators right now, right away, really. State senator, your assembly member, one of each. Got to call them right away and tell them you support Governor Newsom's proposal for broadband, because that is the thing that will revolutionize access in this state. We really put the strength of our financial buying power as the fifth largest economy in the world behind a massive investment in public infrastructure. Not only that will essentially catalyze a movement amongst local governments and communities and youth cooperatives, and just create the knowledge base locally in all parts of the state that we will begin to figure out how to solve our own problems in 50 years. And so when you will run into this problem of how do I get the best deal out of Comcast, my hope and vision and belief is we could pass this package the governor produced by June 10th. That's the day the legislature is planning to voting on it. You will just simply say, well, screw them. I'll just figure it out myself, or we'll just do it ourselves then. And I think that's the ultimate. That should be the ultimate goal of home broadband policy nowadays.
So, Ernesto, I actually had this in my list of questions, so I want to give you a chance to speak a little bit more about the State Broadband Action Plan and AB 34, the Broadband for All Act of 2022. Those are both California initiatives, correct?
Yes, that's right. That's right. Yeah. So, as we were nearing the end of the pandemic and the year plus of the pandemic experience in the state, I think every single city and every single county government, without exception, discovered that they had a huge swath, particularly in the school education sector, a huge swath of kids that just couldn't use, didn't have access to useful internet that allowed them to do remote education, which relatedly makes sure that their parents can't really engage in remote work. That's what their employment allowed, and so all of them have been really galvanized to come to the state legislature and demand an opportunity to solve the problem themselves. Since they just there was no solution for them, it was a matter of renting out hotspots from the Verizons and AT&Ts. Those are vastly inferior in terms of connectivity, particularly if you saturate an area with a bunch of them. Suddenly they're all splitting the access to that one tower that's really far away. So not a solution, and millions of dollars had to be spent just to provide that inferior option. So they're fed up. And AB 34 is really the creation of many of the county governments banding together and asking for, essentially the state to create a bond program and a grant program for them to build out the infrastructure themselves, kind of in collaboration with the schools. The governor's proposal, as I mentioned earlier, is really kind of interrelated with that proposal. And I think you can almost view them interchangeably between one and the other because I think they both kind of reach for the same goal. There's actually a few other bills that are in Sacramento. One that EFF has been supporting, so SB 4, would update our grant program to essentially only support building fiber networks with state money. Up until this point, because of the cable industry and Frontier Communications in particular, on the telecom side, they helped pass a law about 4 years ago that basically shuffled a bunch of state money to build really slow internet access. And if you think about how much more internet we need today than tomorrow and how much the pandemic changed, all that money that the state has spent to build out those options, it's all just got wasted. Those connections don't do anything useful today. So we got to unwind and change that law completely and really design it around much what President Biden's been talking about in his broadband plan, future-proofing long-term investments that last not just 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, but per generation.
We have another question from the audience that I think Liza and Tracy are probably the best to answer, which is, do we know which landlords in Marin have special deals with internet companies? If so, how can we make this public and change the laws in Marin?
I particularly don't know all the landlords that have special deals, but we know they exist here. And in terms of not just making it public, I think we can take the next step and make it not allowed. I mean, this is where public policy can come in, is we can say you're not allowed to have exclusive deals in your business and make that, the law that the Board of Supervisors in the cities and towns pass, instead of just trying to shame them. Not that it's the right thing to do, but just that if we can prevent it and we can fix it.
Tracy, you have a lot of experience in this particular area, so I want to let you talk.
But I couldn't say it better than Liza said it, which is basically, yes, we can fix it with public policy. We have that law. It's passed in San Francisco. It's coming to Oakland and Berkeley, and it needs to come here to Marin County. San Rafael, there are a number of municipalities, Novato, that I think could benefit from it. And it's out there, and we have the language, and we are ready to go in terms of moving that forward. And I guess that I also want to say is fiber build-outs are crucial, and we've talked about why. But they will take some time. And we really feel that bringing some additional competition into the market in the short term will be really beneficial to people that are suffering right now. And we definitely want to build out that marketplace so there are more choices until some of this money and statewide effort sort of manifests, because it will be a couple of years down the line. So those efforts are really, they are coupled and they are complementary. They're not oppositional to each other. And
Tracy, Tracy, can you sort of talk about how those laws passing, at least, and with San Francisco having had it for a while, how has it affected change in its existence?
Mm-hmm. San Francisco's law has been in effect since 2016. It's important to say, for cities that are concerned about litigation, absolutely nothing has progressed all of the way to litigation. But what has happened is that numerous tenants have been able to ask for service requests from alternative providers, and landlords that balked or hesitated were basically scared straight by a letter saying, no, this is the law and you need to observe this tenant's request. As far as we know, we currently have 66 different properties that so far have been impacted by the San Francisco law in terms of, opening up the opportunity for tenants in those properties to be served by alternate providers. And the important thing is that has done a great deal for the stability of the alternative providers out there, because expanding into multi-unit buildings is the easiest way for an ISP to grow. And so it creates a situation where the competition for the incumbent providers becomes stronger. And that creates situations where prices potentially in the long term will start to drop, and service incentives will be offered because they'll have to be. Because if you have a choice, then the more affordable, more reliable provider is what you'll pick. So we think that, within the constraints of the marketplace as it is, this has a lot of solid and substantial benefits that people will be able to recognize if they bring it to this.
Yeah, I always say that I have only lived in 3 cities my entire life: Los Angeles, New York, and San Francisco. And it wasn't until I got to San Francisco that I had any choice in my ISP. I was always stuck with whatever giant one had to deal with wherever I lived. Chris, I wanted to ask you, when it comes to community networks, what are the various models that you've seen, and what do you think the most effective local intervention has been?
I can dodge that question by saying that it's to listen to the local people, to talk with business owners, talk with libraries, talk with organizations representing the unconnected, and develop a real sense of what your needs are. I do believe we want to get a wire to everyone's place of business and home, but I don't think it makes sense for that to be what we do next. I think if you want to prioritize people who are unconnected, you really have to figure out how to do that. You may need philanthropy to help, because that is not going to pencil out. If you want to create economic development opportunities and jobs, that might pencil out and pay for itself over a 5 or 10 year horizon. So you really have to look at what problems you want to solve. And that problem is not a lack of broadband. It is a lack of connectivity for low-income folks, perhaps particularly in public housing, or perhaps in distributed among Section 8 recipients. There's a variety of ways to define this. You want to get as granular as possible to understand the problem and then start looking at solutions. And they may well involve partnerships. I think most municipal investments into broadband will involve partnerships moving forward, rather than a model like Chattanooga where they do everything themselves.
Ernesto, I want to very briefly talk about the federal action on this topic. We have both the president endorsing a very broad, pun not intended, plan for access, as well as several bills in Congress.
Yeah, so this summer really is going to be so call your state legislator and assembly member and senator, and then call your congressperson and your 2 state senators, because we're having a parallel debate in DC about what the future of broadband access should look like, and this is really going to be a once in a lifetime decision that I think we either make the right call and set a course for the future or stick with the past. And what's basically being decided is, do we want a federal infrastructure program that is designed around equivalent 21st century ready service for all people? And I can tell you, who's the most in the door with their lobbyists and other players fighting that. It's your cable monopoly, your Comcast and your Charter and your one choice in your market, because they're perfectly happy with the status quo. It worked for them when you needed to buy more expensive service from them when you had no other choice. How dare the government figure out a way to get around that and fix that? So, that is the nature of the fight. It's going to be about high speed. It's going to be about whether it should be fiber or any old service and any old basic that people work. My hope is, given that both I would say the majority leadership on the Democratic side and the president both articulating, I think, the right vision of where we should be going, means that we are steps away with enough push from the public at the end of the day from getting this right. So, the bill is the Accessible Affordable Internet for All Act. James Clyburn in South Carolina is the lead author, and it really should be commended for, I think, laying the groundwork for, solving the problem. I mean, I think it's kind of foreign to people, the idea that we actually could just solve this problem. It's a problem of choice, not a problem of gravity and realities and unbreakable laws. No, we decide what our market looks like, and we're making that decision this I think this summer, this year at least, the latest, in Washington. Yes.
And for those of you who want to, as Ernesto has made very clear, the important thing is to call your local representatives and call your federal representatives for the Accessible Affordable Internet for All Act. If you go to act.eff.org, we've made it very easy for you to send an email to your senators and your representative to tell them to support the Affordable Accessible Internet for All Act, a name that is too long and has too many A's in it to be comfortable to say. I want to thank our panelists. I just want to end with one last thing, which is a call to action from Liza for anything going on in Marin specifically for our viewers.
Thanks. First, I would suggest everyone get involved. And one way is to become part of the Digital Marin Project. We want everyone's needs identified, and then we can prioritize, just like Chris said. This is what we're doing here in Marin. So you can easily find us at godigitalmarin.org. I would also say, just reinforce writing or calling your elected representatives. I've been in government for over 30 years, and you'd be surprised that 1 or 2 letters or phone calls can make a difference. And then finally, what we have been seeing in some of these projects that we're doing very quickly to address the current needs is join a group. Grassroots efforts work, and we will get the funding. We have gotten funding from Marin City and for Canal and out in Bolinas and West Marin, from government, from nonprofits, from businesses doing free work, and even private donors who open their checkbook and will write 5- and 6-digit donations to these efforts. And so, but the community in that area has to organize and put skin in the game, and then all these other entities can come and they will support whatever the efforts are, not just getting wires in the ground. So get involved. I mean, that's really the call to action.
Great. Thank you so much to our panelists. I could talk about this for another hour, but I think other people deserve their time back. And thank you so much for having us all here today.
Hi, everybody. My name is Mike Blakely, and I'm the CEO of the Marin Economic Forum. And let me just thank the organizers for the opportunity to be a sponsor of this super important event. And before I get into some closing remarks, I just wanted to recap some of the points that really stuck out to me from the earlier conversation. So first of all, here in Marin County, as was confirmed by Liza Massey, we have both a geographic and a demographic challenge with accessing internet. We have 5 areas, and those are heavily populated areas where access seems to be a challenge. But we also have populations like our older adult population, which Liza said we were surprised to learn are struggling with access and issues like digital literacy. But the important thing is, as Chris noted, there are many regions that are dealing successfully with this issue. So public-private collaboration really is a key issue going forward in this. As Chris pointed out, we all benefit from these public platforms, and access to broadband and improving our infrastructure here in Marin County is a key issue. And the third thing that jumped out to me as being an organization that focuses on economics is that this notion of competition and anti-competitive measures that other ISPs are taking. I actually think this is not well known here in Marin County by our resident population. So I want to thank all the speakers for bringing this issue to light. And we know going forward now that through efforts like Digital Marin, that this issue and improving access and fairness for residents in Marin County is well on its way. So I wanted to close today's with just a few remarks. So at the Marin Economic Forum, we view social issues like the digital divide through an economic lens. So if you're talking about the digital divide, that is something in economic terms that can widen the gap between rich and poor. And when you're in a community like Marin County, where there's already some evidence of growing income disparities, that can be a real problem and something that absolutely demands our attention. As the pandemic has shown, adoption to digital by schools, by businesses, and individuals was really critical, and it was accelerated. And those that had good access to digital tools were able to, in some cases, even flourish, while others were left behind. So we know that going forward, if we're going to provide opportunities, especially opportunities for our youth and youth in vulnerable communities in Marin County, for economic mobility, we've got to enhance their ability and all residents' availability to access these amazing technological advances that we're seeing every day. And conversations like these today, where we're hearing from experts that are laying out roadmaps of how we as a community can follow and improve access, is critical. So once again, on behalf of the organizers, thank you for organizing this and allowing all of these sponsor organizations to be a part of today's discussion. All event registrants will receive a follow-up communication with information on how to take action to bridge the digital divide in Marin County. Thank you, everybody, and have a great day.